Shout out to Asper's Gaming for supporting me at level 3 or higher on Patreon. Hey everyone, I'm Albert Boris. Alright, so I've got some good news and I've got some bad news. The good news is that Wave 5 of the Kart 8 Deluxe Booster Course Pass has now finally been released, hallelujah! The bad news is, Nintendo announced it on my first day of vacation abroad in Lithuania. Could they really have picked a worse time? First, they announced Wave 2 on the final day of last year's vacation, now this.
It's like poetry. It rhymes.
Yeah. Unsurprisingly, that's why I wasn't able to make a discussion video for its trailer like I did with Wave 3 and 4. Luckily, however, I returned just in time for Wave 5's release. And one thing is for sure, it couldn't have been a better homecoming gift. Just like with every other wave, it was an amazing journey, and even better, they even released a new Nitro in Kart Tour as well, Piranha Plant Pipeline. It's not particularly amazing, it feels like a more gimmicky Piranha Plant Pipeway, but I had some fun with it. The name is pretty repetitive, I would have called it Pipe Canyon City, but it's an overall difficult and fun track, with alternate paths and interesting elements. Too bad the camera isn't really cooperative at times. I suppose it's the closest we'll get to Green Pipe City in Mario Kart though. But back to Wave 5. Surprisingly enough, when I first saw the trailer, I wasn't really that exhilarated. Partly because my focus was obviously elsewhere, being on vacation, but the courses, particularly the retros, didn't really look as innovative as in previous waves, that is, except for Moonview Highway. The Nitros were a different story. Needless to say though, having so low expectations resulted in me having way more fun with Wave 5 than I thought I'd have. So much so that overall, I think this might be the best wave yet. Wave 5 had so many good tracks that ranking them all was surprisingly difficult, and even after spending hours thinking about it, I wasn't entirely certain. But it goes to show how consistent it is, to the point that even the weakest course of Wave 5 was surprisingly good. And when I say surprisingly good, I mean it's a sheer miracle that it's not bad. I think you guys know which track I'm talking about. So, what is my ranking of the courses in Wave 5? Let's find out. I've done this type of ranking ever since Wave 2 came out, so it's only right that I add yet another fine addition to the collection. With all that being said, let's get started. In last place, we have Sunset Wilds. I think you all saw this coming. Everyone, including me, seemed to universally agree that what Nintendo did to this track was just awful. It just makes me sad thinking about it. Mario Kart Super Circuit is home to a lot of unique courses that were limited by the hardware they were played on, so seeing them remade in newer games often puts a smile on my face. Although in recent times, I can't really say I've been impressed by them. One of my favorite courses from this game would have to be Sunset Wilds, where you drive on the American frontier, watching the sun slowly go down every lap. It always felt so climactic in my opinion, partly thanks to the epic music, and despite the sunset only being an aesthetic feature, it always elevated the experience. So how did all of this translate over to Mario Kart 8 Deluxe? Well, for starters, it's based on the version from Mario Kart Tour, which tremendously oversimplified the layout. Most of the course elements are still there, such as the mud and Shy Guys, but it's largely dumbed down, with everything being both shorter and easier than in the original version. It doesn't help that you mostly just drive in straight lines now. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe's version plays largely the same, with one major difference. The sun doesn't go down. Yeah. Nintendo, why? Why remake this track but not bring back what everyone recognized it for? Apparently it has to do with Mario Kart 8's lighting system, but there was a whole array of other courses to pick from them. Yoshi Desert exists. Granted, it's only an aesthetic feature, the gameplay is what really matters, but in this case, the gameplay isn't even that good anymore, so the sunset would have been the least to compensate for. It just makes me disappointed. Ironically enough, I was slightly worried they forgot about it since none of the clips of the track in the Wave 5 trailer showcased the track at night, but I dismissed it as Nintendo saving it as a surprise. If only. On the plus side, for all of its flaws, it's probably the prettiest of Wave 5's tracks, with detailing everywhere, on the rocks, the road, and even the skybox. Now imagine how pretty the sun setting would have been. And luckily, the music is as epic as it's always been, making me feel like I'm racing until the break of dawn. None of this makes the track amazing, but if I imagine Sunset Wilds never had the gimmick we know it for, I'd say it's a simple but epic beginner track, similar to Sky Garden, but even then, no way this track holds a candle to the rest of Wave 5 sadly. Overall, you know what, I don't want to think about this track anymore, let's move on. Luckily, as it turns out, Sunset Wilds is the only course in Wave 5 which I had largely negative things to say about, because starting from 7th place, we immediately transitioned to the great courses. That said, you might be surprised to see this track so low on my ranking, Vancouver Velocity. As far as city courses go, Vancouver Velocity is typically regarded as the fan favorite. Me personally, I always found it a bit overrated, but I can't deny how charming it is. With the late autumn setting, the night sky with northern lights, and dear goodness bless the suspension bridge. When it first released in Mario Kart Tour, it was unlike any other city track with how much more distinct it was. Although now in 2023, I have to admit it's a bit weirdly designed. The main problem with Vancouver Velocity in Mario Kart 8 would be its progression. Being a city track, each lap takes you through a different part of the course, and for me, depending on how the overall route plays out, it can either be what makes it or breaks it for me. In Vancouver Velocity's case, it's got one of the most disappointing progressions ever. Lap 1 is in the shortest way possible amazing. It's quite possibly one of the best laps out of any city track, with the snowy forest, anti-gravity suspension bridge and massive glider section. It's only elevated by the stunning night and glorious music, but it soon becomes pretty clear that while Vancouver Velocity excels in atmosphere, it doesn't have the most well thought out layouts. Laps 2 and 3 are almost completely different from the first lap, but barely distinct at all from each other, which makes for such a jarring change. And sadly, both are kinda lacking compared to lap 1. Lap 2 takes you through a park with nothing going on, as well as a small ice rink, and then lap 3 is basically the same except you drive through a tunnel. Out of all possibilities for this track, they chose to end it in the shortest and most generic way possible. Like, you don't think lap 1 would have left a stronger final impression perhaps? For what it's worth, I still have a lot of fun with Vancouver. The last 2 laps aren't awful, and I do have some fun with the shortcuts and navigating the rink. I just wish lap 1's elements weren't locked after the beginning. It is the weakest of Wave 5 city tracks in my opinion, but it's still a great track overall, and I have a lot of fun with it. Moving on to 6th place. Alright, so when I say that Wave 5 on the whole is nothing short of amazing, I feel like I need to reference something else for comparison in order to truly see the greatness. If you watched my ranking of Mario Kart Double Dash's courses, you know that I put Daisy Cruiser in the top 3, classifying it as an S tier course. Well, in Wave 5, it's only the 6th best track, and it's not even that much of a downgrade. Daisy Cruiser has always had a bit of a special place in my heart, as someone who regularly traveled overseas by ferry growing up. In fact, I even was on one last week when I traveled to Lithuania. It always brings me joy thinking about those experiences, and while Daisy Cruiser is obviously a bit more luxury than the average ferry, it's a creative track. It's probably the least changed course from its original counterpart in Wave 5, largely playing the same as it always has, although the few changes we did get did unfortunately bring this course down here on the ranking. Instead of having to avoid the pool, now you can just drive through it, which removes some of the difficulty, and the cellar is flooded for some reason. They're not awful changes, they just make me ask myself, why? In the end though, you're still driving on a soothing cruise, avoiding tables and taking in the magnificent view, so I can't really complain about it. In the end, it's an amazing retro course, even if it's slightly worse than its original version. In 5th place, we have the course nobody expected, WII Moonview Highway. This, I would have gambled away all of my Patreon earnings betting it won't come. I mean, we already have a lot of city courses in the Booster Course Pass, at night too. We just talked about Vancouver Velocity as an example. But hey, Nintendo likes to subvert our expectations, and this is certainly a pleasant surprise, considering up until this point, all of the Wii courses in the past were just the typical fan favorites like Coconut Mall. We've had a lot of traffic courses in the Mario Kart series, but Moonview Highway takes the cake for being among the best. It's super frantic, with vehicle coming in from all directions, boost panels scattered everywhere, sirens in the distance, you name it. And this is despite the layout itself being a bit on the simple side. It's always been a perfect representation of driving around a larger city at night. And unlike a lot of other retro tracks in the Booster Course Pass, this one doesn't really feel like a downgrade. I mean sure, the cars are slower, but at least they go in both directions. I still regularly have problems with them. Really, besides me also preferring Wii's physics, that's about the only slight issue. They not only kept the cliff you could trick off of at the start, they even added another one. And the remix is just kingly. Well, the regular theme that is. The city variant feels a bit quiet. In short though, Moonview Highway is an amazing remake, and I am more than happy about its inclusion in Wave 5. Opening up the top half of my ranking, we have our second city track on the list, Tour Los Angeles Laps. This was personally my most hyped course for Wave 5, partly because I've always been a big fan of it in Mario Kart Tour, but also because it had potential to have one of the best routes out of any city track. It didn't, but it was still pretty great. Up with Bangkok Rush, it's probably the city track that saw the most changes compared to its tour version. Sadly, the beautiful sunset was replaced by regular day, but on the other hand, the new remix has a very fresh metal feel to it, which I'll take every day over whatever the original song was. In fact, I'd say the entire track has a completely different atmosphere now, because while the original was pretty relaxing, this is far more energetic, which honestly fits a lot more, considering how ambitious the track is. It's probably the largest city track of them all, with every single lap taking place in a completely different location. I mean, just look at the map itself. Lap 1 largely takes place on a beach and skate park, Lap 2 takes you over a stadium in Beverly Hills, while Lap 3 has you racing in Inglewood oil fields, avoiding pump jacks and picking paths. All laps are not only really fun and have a ton of course elements, but they also flow nicely. Or well, I'm not entirely satisfied with the route. Now yeah, while lap 2 is more empty than the rest, I feel like the epic glider would have been enough to justify it as the final lap. Lap 3 is the most difficult one, sure, but an oil field feels a bit weird for a final impression, especially considering this is the variant everyone hated in Mario Kart Tour. But hey, lap 3 is actually my favorite one and has an even more engaging glider section, so it's not that big of an issue. For what it is, it's one of my favorite city courses in Mario Kart. However, there is an even better one in Wave 5, which we'll get to soon. Now growing up, man, we spent hours of our lives driving as Koopas. In the original version of Mario Kart Wii's Koopa Cape. Okay, that was terrible, I'm sorry guys. But I think that was a pretty good enough of a hint to let you know which course will open up the top 3 of my ranking. WII Koopa Cape, my favorite retro course this wave. So as it turns out, Wave 5 has 2 WII courses and they're both pleasant surprises in their own right. Moonview Highway because I didn't expect it at all, and Koopa Cape because it's actually pretty amazing in spite of its faults. Just like with all of the other courses in the Boosted Course Pass, Koopa Cape is based on the version playable in Mario Kart Tour, and to say that I dislike it would be putting it mildly. Koopa Cape has always kinda suffered from its remakes slowly devolving over time. The original version is one of my favorite courses of all time, with the river adventure in the mountains, transitioning into avoiding electrical bars in an underwater tube while watching marine life. Over time, as this course got remade for newer games, it saw a pointless glider section, a flooded pipe with no hazards, and lastly a color scheme completely ruining the looks for me. If you know me, you know that I'm not really a fan of turning rocks yellow, as it just kinda ruins the immersion for me, and it doesn't help that the grass looks even more disgusting in Mario Kart Tour. However, surprisingly enough, this remake, while not on the original's level, is surprisingly fun. Now yes, while I still don't like the color scheme, unlike DLC tracks with a similar setting, it feels like they at least put effort into the texturing this time around, so it doesn't take me out of the experience as much. In fact, I actually think it looks kinda pretty now. This one Koopa shell looks better than the entirety of Wave 1 combined. The underwater pipe is also much less disappointing, because while yes, it's based on the flooded version, the developers made it into an anti-gravity section, ultimately making it a bit more exciting with all of the boosters. The half pipe still feels a bit out of place, but combined with the anti-gravity, the gameplay complements it better since you're encouraged to take all of the speed boosts there are, whether it's driving through the spinning things or tricking off the half pipe. I still prefer the original version of this section, but now it feels less like they ruined it and more like they just gave us an alternate take on this section. And it's fun in its own right. Yeah, who would have known Koopa Cape would be as fun as it is in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe? It is truly an honor. Moving on to second place. The best city track in not just Wave 5, but perhaps even the entire Boosted Course Pass so far would be Athens Dash. Holy mother of goodness did he push the limits for this course. It was this close to being my favorite of Wave 5 overall. Perhaps the most defining difference it has from other city courses is the fact that it barely takes place in the urban areas of Athens itself. For the most part, you're driving on the Acropolis and exploring ruins and such. Only a small section at the beginning of lap 3 has you gliding over a neighborhood. And on one hand, yeah, I do wish we got to explore the metropolitan areas of Athens as well, but what we got is honestly more than worth it. It's one of, if not perhaps the most epic city track to have ever graced Mario Kart in my opinion. The music makes me feel like a tourist being thrilled by my greatest vacation ever, and is quite honestly my favorite Mario Kart song of all time. It's simply perfection. It also helps that the route for this course is probably the best they could have done. Lap 1 is a great first impression, with a huge drop, trek through various monuments, and a glider up to a cave. Lap 2 is more or less the same, but a bit different and in reverse. And then Lap 3 has you gliding over a metropolitan area before making your way up a mountain with boost panels and boulders falling down on you. It's a truly epic ride, and it's beautifully concluded as you drive up the stairs to the Parthenon. It honestly should have been in Wave 6 with how climactic it is. The only issue with this track is that the twomps that were originally present in Mario Kart Tour have been removed, but I didn't even notice it on my first playthrough. It's an absolutely masterful course, only beaten out by a single other track this wave. Whatever it could possibly be.
Get off the toilet!
Well, that sure was a surprise, was it? Okay, I know it's kinda predictable to declare the brand new Nitro to be the best course this wave, but Squeaky Clean Sprint is just that kingly. In fact, the more I think about it, it might actually be my favorite course of the entire Boosted Course Pass, possibly dethroning Ninja Hideaway after all this time. How should I even describe it? You're racing in a literal bathroom for starters. Such a concept has so much potential to be a creative track, and this course quite maximized its potential. It's got literally everything needed. You open up by driving into a sink before tricking off bath bombs in a bathtub, cutting corners in a narrow drain, avoiding soap on the ground while a fan is pushing you to the right, tricking off a geyser from a... yeah, and I'm just scratching the surface here. Not enough that there are so many creative elements in the track, but just like with Ninja Hideaway, there are so many alternate pathways to take. There's an entire secret road you can take by tricking off that geyser, and after taking its glider to the finish line, there's even another hidden path to the right which I didn't notice on my first playthrough. It's such a unique course, there's no way I wouldn't put it in first place. I guess if I had to complain about something, the drain section is a bit too narrow and the camera makes it a bit hard to not collide with the wall, but over time, I've gotten better to the point that it's actually slightly fun. In the end, Squeaky Clean Sprint is my favorite course of Wave 5, and overall, that was my ranking of all of the tracks this wave. But what is your ranking? Did you agree with me or not? If you enjoyed this video, then make sure to like, share and subscribe to my channel, as I talk about everything Mario related. With all that being said, I'm signing off. Until next time.